It always began with the sound of the door, that faint creak in the silence of the night, so ordinary to anyone else. But to me, it was the signal that terror was about to step into my room. The house looked peaceful from the outside. The lights were off, the family resting after another long day. But my body was already tense, anticipating what would come. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my little hands gripping the blanket as if thin fabric could protect me. My heart would beat so fast that I wondered if it might give me away, if he could hear it pounding even before he crossed the threshold. I knew that the moment the door moved, my childhood would be stolen again. For everyone else, he was the man they trusted. He was respected, admired, someone they described as dependable, someone you could leave children with without a second thought. That was the mask he wore in daylight. In the dark, the mask fell away. Behind closed doors, his footsteps in the hallway became the chains that bound me to fear. I was too young to understand why no one else noticed, too young to understand why the world seemed blind to the monster hiding in plain sight. I only knew that at night, the walls of my room closed in, and I was trapped. Sometimes I tried to imagine the life of other children. I would picture a girl somewhere else, in another city, curling up with her stuffed animals and drifting into sleep without fear. She could dream of fairy tales or adventures, her biggest worry being what game to play the next morning. I envied her because I could not remember the last time I had dreamed freely. My nights were stolen, every ounce of peace smothered by the certainty that he would come. When you're a child, the bedroom is supposed to be your sanctuary. For me, it was a cage. Every shadow was a threat, every silence a warning. The cruelest part was the betrayal of normalcy. By day, life looked almost ordinary. We sat at the same table, shared meals, and exchanged polite words, and all the while, I carried the weight of the night before. I would watch him laugh with others, his smile so convincing that it made me question my own reality. Could a man who everyone adored truly be the same one who slipped into my room? Children are taught to trust adults, to believe that family means safety. For me, family was the place where danger hid in plain sight. I remember one evening in particular. The house was filled with voices after a family gathering, and everyone praised him for helping fix something in the kitchen. They called him reliable, the kind of man you could always count on. I sat there silent, my throat burning, wanting to scream that they were wrong, that the man they admired had turned my nights into torment. But the words never came out. The approval of others built a wall I could not break. Each compliment thrown his way was another lock on my silence. The nights followed a pattern. I would close my eyes tight, pretending to be asleep, hoping that maybe this time he would leave me alone. I prayed that the floorboards would stay quiet, that the door would not move. But prayers often died in my chest before they reached my lips. The handle would turn, the wood would groan, and the air in the room would change. Even the temperature seemed to drop, or maybe it was just the chill of fear spreading through my body. His shadow would stretch across the room, devouring the little space where I thought I could hide. Fear has a way of reshaping time. Minutes felt like hours. Seconds felt like they would never end. I would count my breaths, forcing myself not to cry too loud, terrified that any noise would make it worse. I was too young to have words for the things that happened, too young to understand the depth of the violation, but old enough to know that it was wrong, old enough to feel shame seep into my bones, shame that was never mine to carry, but clung to me all the same. When the night finally passed and morning light came, it felt surreal. The sun would pour through the curtains, chasing away the shadows, but not the memory of them. I would sit at the breakfast table with him right across from me, his hands casually holding a cup of coffee, his mouth chewing the same food as everyone else. To anyone watching, it was an ordinary scene. To me, it was unbearable. Every bite of bread felt like sand in my mouth. Every sip of milk turned sour. I wanted to stand up and scream to break the illusion, but I sat still, my silence stronger than my hunger. Children often cling to small details to survive. For me, it was the hope that maybe tonight he would not come. Maybe tonight I could sleep, Maybe tonight the door would remain closed. It was a fragile hope, one that shattered night after night, but I held on to it because it was the only light in the darkness. That hope kept me breathing when everything else in me wanted to disappear. And yet, as the days blended into nights and the cycle repeated, the hope began to feel like a lie I told myself to endure. Each night reminded me that my voice was locked away, my truth buried under the weight of his deception and the blindness of those who surrounded us. The door that never truly closed became the symbol of my captivity. It was not just wood and hinges. It was the line between a world that saw him as trustworthy and the world I knew in silence. And every time it opened, I was reminded that no one was coming to save me. Silence does not come all at once. It starts small, with a single moment when your voice is ignored, a single time when the words you gather with all your courage are dismissed. For me, silence began as a whisper in my chest, a hesitation before speaking, a fear that maybe no one would want to hear what I had to say. I remember the first time I tried to tell my mother. My voice shook, my body trembled, but I forced the words out because I believed she was the one person who would listen. Her response was a soft laugh and a comment about how children often dream strange things at night. That was the first stone laid in the wall that would eventually surround me. The wall grew higher each time I tried again. When I came with tears in my eyes, pointing to the man who made my nights unbearable, I was met with a sigh and a warning not to speak nonsense. Adults around me believed they already knew the truth about him, so my truth was dismissed as fantasy. Children are often accused of exaggeration, and I was no different. What no one saw was that my so-called exaggeration was my reality. The disbelief of those I loved most hurt deeper than the footsteps that haunted me in the dark. Shame and silence are cousins. Once you are silenced, shame arrives to live inside you, convincing you that maybe you were wrong to speak in the first place. I began to wonder if the problem was me. Maybe I was imagining too much. Maybe I was weak. Shame twisted the story in my mind until I began to carry guilt for something I never asked for. That is the cruelty of silence. It does not only mute your voice, it rewrites your understanding of yourself. In school, I was quiet. Teachers described me as a shy child, but the truth was I had learned that speaking was dangerous. The few times I raised my voice at home ended in dismissal or scolding, so I trained myself to keep everything inside. The silence grew heavier, pressing against my ribs until even breathing felt like an effort. I watched other children laugh and run freely, shouting their joys and complaints without hesitation, and I wondered how it felt to believe that someone would listen when you spoke. There were moments when I tried to test the world, to see if perhaps someone outside my family would notice. Once, when a neighbor asked why I looked so tired, I almost said the truth, but fear caught me by the throat. What if she did not believe me either? What if she told my family what I said? The risk felt unbearable, so I just shrugged and blamed it on bad dreams. That became my excuse for everything. Bad dreams, always bad dreams. They were safer than the reality I carried. The worst part was how his image worked against me. He was the man people trusted with their children, the one who helped fix things around the house, the one praised at gatherings for being dependable. He built his reputation like armor, and it protected him from suspicion. In the eyes of the world, he was a good man. In the shadows of my room, he was the reason I learned what despair tasted like. This contradiction silenced me further because I knew that truth was fragile when faced with the weight of his reputation. Silence became so normal that it began to feel like part of my identity. I spoke less, I laughed less, I hid behind a mask of quietness that others mistook for innocence. Inside I was screaming, but the screams had no exit. I would lie awake, wondering if anyone could see it in my eyes, if anyone could sense the storm locked inside me. Sometimes I would stare in the mirror and not recognize the child looking back. Her lips were closed, her shoulders hunched, her eyes heavy. She looked like she had already given up on being heard. When you are silenced long enough, you start to build an alternate world in your head. I created imaginary friends who listened, who nodded, who believed every word I said. They existed only in the corners of my mind, but they gave me the illusion of relief. I would whisper my fears to them when no one else was around, tears running silently down my cheeks, knowing that at least in my imagination, I was no longer invisible. Even so, silence never stopped hurting. It weighed on me like a stone strapped to my chest. Every time I swallowed the truth, it felt heavier. Every time I was told to stop making things up, I felt smaller. I became skilled at hiding pain, at smiling when expected, at nodding when spoken to. But the cost of that skill was my own sense of worth. I started to believe I deserved the silence, that maybe I wasn't important enough to be listened to. There were nights when the weight of silence was worse than the footsteps in the hallway. At least the footsteps ended when the sun came up. Silence followed me everywhere, into every corner of my life, even into the daylight. It taught me to doubt my memories, to question my sanity, to wonder if my voice had any value at all. That is the cruelest lesson a child can learn, to believe that her pain is not worth being heard. And so I grew quieter, shrinking into the background, letting others fill the room with their voices while I disappeared into the silence I had been forced to carry. It was not just the absence of sound. It was the absence of recognition, the absence of protection, the absence of belief. Silence had become my shadow, a constant reminder that my truth did not matter. Yet deep inside, beneath all the layers of shame and fear, there remained a faint pulse of defiance, a small flicker of hope that one day someone would finally hear me. That tiny spark, though buried, refused to die completely, even as the silence grew heavier with each passing day. My bedroom should have been the safest place in the world. It should have been the small universe where a child could retreat, where toys stood guard and dreams wandered freely. But for me, it was nothing more than a cell disguised with curtains and a bed. Every night the walls seemed to close in, not because they moved, but because my fear made them smaller and smaller, until all that was left was me, the darkness, and the sound of footsteps that came closer. I would curl into myself under the blankets, holding them so tight that my fingers ached, as if fabric could shield me from what I knew was coming. Children often invent rituals to make them feel safe. Some cling to a stuffed animal, others whisper prayers or count sheep. My ritual was pretending. I would slow my breathing, force my eyelids shut, and train my body to remain still, as if deep sleep could transform me into something invisible. Sometimes I even convinced myself that if I stayed frozen enough, he might leave, but he never did. The door would always creak, his shadow would spill into the room, and the game of pretending collapsed into terror. There is a particular cruelty in having your sanctuary invaded. A room is supposed to reflect who you are. My small treasures, my drawings, the things that made me feel like a child were all witnesses to the nights when that illusion was stripped away. I remember staring at the faint glow of the stars I had stuck on my ceiling, glowing in the dark, and thinking that they were the only things keeping me company. I tried to believe they were watching me, that maybe they would send a signal to someone, anyone, who could see what was happening. But the glow was weak, and the silence in the house was stronger. Every sense sharpened in those moments. I could hear his breathing before he even reached the bed, the slow, heavy rhythm that made my stomach twist. I could feel the shift in the air, the weight of his presence pressing down on me. My heart would slam against my ribs, desperate to escape, and I would fight the urge to cry out because I had already learned what crying brought me. Nothing. No one would come. No one would open the door to stop him. Crying only gave him the satisfaction of watching my fear grow. So I stayed silent, my screams trapped inside, clawing at my chest with no way out. The morning after was always the strangest part. The same room that had been filled with shadows and dread looked harmless in daylight. Sunlight would dance across the floor. My toys sat in their corners and everything appeared untouched. But I knew that it was only an illusion. The walls carried the echoes of the night. The smell of fear lingered in the air even if no one else could detect it. I would sit up in bed, my body stiff and heavy, and wonder how the world could look so normal when inside me everything was shattered. There were times when I tried to make sense of it by comparing my life to the children around me. At school, they would talk about sleepovers, pillow fights, and staying up late to tell each other secrets. I could never join those conversations because my nights were not filled with laughter or whispered confessions, but with silence and dread. While they argued about who had the softest pillow, I was learning to count the seconds between his footsteps. I often asked myself if they would still laugh so freely if they knew what my nights were like. The difference between their childhood and mine was like the difference between light and shadow. The bed, which should have been a place of rest, became a trap. I would lie there stiff, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the house, as if the walls themselves were warning me of his arrival. Even the sound of the wind outside seemed to mimic the breath that made my skin crawl. I started to hate the night, to dread the setting of the sun. For most children, night means rest and stories read before bed. For me, night meant waiting, bracing myself for something I could not escape. As time passed, I became hyper-aware of every detail. I could predict the exact moment he would come, the rhythm of the house as it settled into silence, the pause between his steps. My instincts sharpened like those of a trapped animal. Fear rewires your brain until it is no longer about living, but about surviving. I did not fall asleep easily because my body never allowed me to let go. Even when exhaustion finally pulled me under, it was shallow, restless sleep, haunted by nightmares that mirrored reality. The cruelest irony was having to face him in the morning, sitting across the breakfast table. He would sip his coffee, butter his bread, and smile as if nothing had happened. To the others at the table, he was just another family member starting his day. To me, he was the monster from the night, his casual gestures a reminder of what he had stolen. I would force myself to chew, the food turning to ash in my mouth, pretending that nothing was wrong while my body screamed inside. When people talk about scars, they often think of marks on the skin. But the scars I carried were invisible. They lived in the way I avoided eye contact, the way I flinched at sudden sounds, the way I shrank back when someone walked too close. These scars built a fortress around me, one that separated me from the world outside. My room was both the prison where fear lived and the stage where my silence rehearsed itself night after night. And so the cycle continued, night after night, morning after morning, until it became routine. That was perhaps the most tragic part of all. What should have been unthinkable became ordinary. I no longer asked why. I no longer begged for it to stop. I simply endured, because when you are a child and no one believes you, endurance feels like the only option left. My room was no longer a place of dreams. It was a reminder that nightmares could be real, that monsters could hide behind smiles, and that sometimes the darkest place was not outside in the world, but within the four walls where you were supposed to feel safe. There is a particular kind of pain that comes when the person you expect to protect you chooses instead to look away. I can still see her face in those moments, the way her eyes would harden as if she were shutting a door inside herself. My mother was supposed to be my shield, my voice, when mine was too small, the one who would believe me when no one else would. But when I tried to tell her what was happening, she became something else entirely. Her silence was not ignorance. It was a decision. The first time I gathered enough courage to whisper the truth, my words were barely audible. I thought if I said them softly, it would be less frightening. I told her that he came into my room at night, that I was scared. She looked at me for a long moment, then brushed the hair out of my face and told me to stop making up stories. She said I was too imaginative, that I had nightmares and needed to grow out of them. That dismissal cut deeper than any shadow in my room. It told me that the one person I depended on had chosen not to see. It did not stop there. Every attempt I made to bring her into my reality ended in the same place, with her protecting the appearance of family over the safety of her child. Sometimes she scolded me sharply, saying that if I kept talking like that, people would think badly of us. Other times she sighed and told me not to ruin things, that families had to stick together. that no one would believe a child saying such horrible things about her own uncle. Each time she shut me down, I felt myself shrinking a little more. I was learning in real time that her loyalty to him outweighed her loyalty to me. I remember one night after I tried again to confide in her. She sat on the edge of my bed, her voice low and stern, and she told me to never repeat those words again. She said if anyone heard me, they would think I was sick in the head, that I was trying to destroy the family. She warned me that if I kept talking, people would laugh at me, call me a liar, or worse, they would take me away from home. I was old enough to understand what that meant. Her words were meant to protect the family's name, but what they did was cement my prison. I realized that if I spoke too loudly, I would not only lose her, I would lose the only home I had. Her complicity was not always in words. Sometimes it was in the way she changed the subject quickly when I tried to linger too close to the truth. Other times it was in her silence when he was praised by relatives, when she smiled politely instead of saying what she knew. I would catch her eyes during those moments, wondering if she felt even a fraction of the weight I carried. But her gaze would slide away from mine, as though meeting my eyes would force her to admit what she already knew. There is a cruelty in being abandoned by someone who is still physically there. She made me dinner, washed my clothes, tucked me into bed, but all those gestures were stripped of their meaning because I knew that when the night came, she would leave me defenseless. I wanted her embrace to feel safe, but it felt empty. It felt like she was hugging the image of a daughter she wanted, not the broken child standing in front of her. That kind of abandonment leaves scars that do not fade, because they are not born from absence, but from betrayal. The hardest part was trying to understand why. As a child, I could not grasp the layers of fear, shame, and control that might have shaped her silence. All I knew was that her choice left me alone. I wondered if she was afraid of him too. I wondered if she thought it was easier to sacrifice my truth than to confront him and risk tearing the family apart. Maybe in her mind she thought she was preserving something, but from my side of it, she was destroying me. It made me question everything about love and protection. Was love supposed to feel like silence? Was protection supposed to mean pretending nothing was happening? I learned to doubt not just her, but the very idea that anyone could truly keep me safe. That doubt followed me into every corner of my life. If my own mother could look me in the eyes and choose not to believe me, then who else could I possibly trust? The silence between us grew heavy. We lived in the same house, shared the same spaces, but there was a distance that widened with every unspoken truth. I stopped trying to tell her. My attempts had been crushed too many times. Instead, I carried the weight alone, and she let me. Sometimes late at night, after he had left my room, I would lie there wondering if she heard anything, if she ever pressed her ear to the wall and listened, if she knew but convinced herself that not knowing was safer. Those questions circled endlessly, but the answers never came. Her silence became a second wound layered on top of his actions. One scar was carved by his hands, the other by her refusal to save me. Together they taught me that I was not worth fighting for, that my pain was not worth disrupting the fragile image of family she clung to. The betrayal sank deeper each time she smiled at him in public, each time she handed him a plate of food, each time she looked away when I silently begged her for help. And so, I learned to live with two prisons, the one created by him and the one maintained by her. In some ways, her silence was more suffocating than his presence, because his shadow came at night and left when the morning arrived, but her betrayal was constant. It followed me in every room, in every meal, in every glance that avoided the truth. It told me that I was alone, even when I was not, and that kind of loneliness seeps into every part of who you are, reshaping not only your nights, but your days, not only your body, but your soul. Reputation is a powerful mask. For him, it was armor so strong that no one ever dared to question what hid beneath it. To the world outside our home, he was the dependable man everyone turned to. Neighbors praised him for helping repair fences or lending tools. At church, people nodded with admiration when his name was mentioned. Family gatherings echoed with compliments about how trustworthy he was, how blessed we were to have a man like him among us. Every word of praise for him was like a dagger in me, because I knew the truth buried behind those walls of respect. There is something unbearable about watching others applaud the person who destroys you in secret. I remember sitting quietly at the table during Sunday dinners, listening to laughter and chatter, while inside my chest I wanted to scream. They called him generous, kind, a man who would give the shirt off his back, and I sat there with my stomach twisting, because I had seen the other side, the one no one dared imagine. I realized that lies could wear smiles, that cruelty could look like kindness when enough people agreed to believe it. His reputation made me invisible. It was not just that people failed to see the signs, it was that they refused to look. Who would question the man everyone adored? To accuse him was to accuse the very foundation of trust in the family. The fear of scandal was stronger than the instinct to protect me. It was easier for them to believe in his facade than to face the darkness he carried. And so I carried the weight alone, buried beneath layers of their admiration for him. I learned early how society often protects the predator instead of the victim. When someone has built an image of respect, that image becomes sacred. To tarnish it feels like a sin to those who benefit from it. He was useful, reliable, always present when others needed him. That usefulness bought him silence. I became collateral damage in the preservation of his mask. My pain was a small price for them to pay to maintain the illusion of a respectable man. There were moments when I thought maybe someone could see through it. A relative would pause, looking at me longer than usual, or a neighbor would notice how tired I seemed. My heart would race with the hope that they might ask the right question. But no one ever did. They smiled, patted my head, and returned to praising him. The opportunity to break the silence slipped away. Every time someone chose comfort over truth, the walls of our house absorbed these secrets. They stood tall and silent, protecting him with their stillness. Within those walls, the contrast between his public image and my private torment grew sharper. I began to resent not only him, but the house itself, because it had become a fortress for his lies. The walls that should have echoed with love and laughter instead became keepers of everything unsaid. I felt as though they were mocking me, reminding me that no one outside would ever believe what they contained. It is terrifying how quickly a lie can become stronger than truth. A truth spoken by a child weighed little against the polished respectability of an adult man. My words were whispers. His image was a shout. People see what they want to see, and they wanted to see him as dependable, honorable, trustworthy. So they did. I was erased by their desire to keep the story intact. My existence as a victim threatened the picture they held, so they erased it with silence and disbelief. Carrying that knowledge twisted my understanding of justice. I wondered if the world was always this blind, if people everywhere chose to worship appearances over honesty. I asked myself why goodness was measured by public actions while the hidden truths were ignored. If a man donated money to the church, did that outweigh what he did behind closed doors? If he fixed a neighbor's roof, did that erase the nights he stole from me? These questions tormented me, circling in my mind with no answers. I watched him master his performance. He knew exactly how to behave in front of others, how to charm, how to make people laugh. He had built a character so convincing that even I sometimes doubted my own reality. When everyone around me praised him, I felt like I was going insane. Could I really be the only one who saw what he truly was? The doubt gnawed at me until it became part of my silence. His performance was not just for them, it was a weapon against me. Every time I looked at him surrounded by people who adored him, I felt the walls of my prison tighten. They did not see his shadow. They did not hear the door at night. They did not smell the fear that lingered in my room. To them, he was light. To me, he was darkness. Living inside that contradiction was unbearable. It taught me that truth can be buried under layers of admiration, and that people would rather live with a beautiful lie than face an ugly truth. And yet, even buried beneath all of that, my truth refused to die completely. It pulsed inside me like a wound that would not close, raw and demanding to be heard. I did not know how or when, but I carried a small flicker of hope that one day the walls would crack, that one day someone would see through his mask. Until then, I lived in silence, suffocated by the weight of his false respect, waiting for a moment when my reality could finally escape the shadows. The day the silence finally broke did not arrive like thunder. It came slowly in fragments, like sunlight slipping through a crack in heavy curtains. For years I believed my voice would never matter, that the truth would die with me, buried under the weight of his lies and my mother's silence. But one day, someone outside that house saw what no one else dared to see. It was not because I screamed louder. It was because the pain that had been buried for so long began to leak through every part of me until it could no longer be ignored. A teacher was the first to notice. She looked at me one morning when I could not hold my head up, when my shoulders sagged with exhaustion from nights without sleep. She asked if I was sick, if I needed to rest. I wanted to give my usual excuse, to shrug it off with the word nightmares, but my lips trembled and my silence betrayed me. Her eyes narrowed with concern, the kind of concern that does not fade with a quick answer. She kept watching me, day after day, noticing the marks I tried to hide, the way my body recoiled when someone walked too close, the emptiness in my smile. Then a neighbor mentioned something to my aunt. She said she had seen me sitting alone outside one evening, staring into the distance, looking far too old for a child my age. These small observations began to connect, like pieces of a puzzle that no one in my own family wanted to solve. For the first time, adults around me began to suspect that my silence had a story inside it. When questions finally came, I froze. Years of being dismissed had trained me to keep quiet, but something inside me shifted. I saw in their eyes a glimmer of belief, something I had never seen before. With trembling words, I began to let the truth out. It was messy, broken, interrupted by sobs, but it was mine. And this time, instead of being told to stop, instead of being silenced, I was heard. My voice, small and shaky, cut through the years of deception. The reaction was not perfect. Some still doubted. Some clung to the image of him they had worshipped for years. But enough people listened. Enough people believed. And that changed everything. The cycle of secrecy began to unravel. The walls of respect that had protected him for so long began to crack. The truth, once buried, started to see the light. For the first time, I was not completely alone. Liberation is not instant. It does not wash away years of fear in a single moment. Healing is not neat. It comes in waves, sometimes tender, sometimes violent, often unpredictable. But the day I was heard was the day I realized that silence could be broken, that my pain was not invisible. That realization planted something inside me that had been missing for years. Hope, fragile at first, but real. I began to understand that the story was no longer only about what he had taken from me. It was about what I could reclaim. Every time I spoke the truth out loud, the chains around me loosened. Every time someone looked at me with belief instead of dismissal, another layer of shame began to peel away. Slowly, I learned that my voice had power. Slowly, I discovered that my story, though scarred, was not over. Even now the scars remain. They live in the way I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, the echo of footsteps haunting my memory. They live in the way trust does not come easily, in the way I still question whether people see the truth in me. But those scars are no longer cages. They are reminders that I survived. They are proof that I endured what was meant to silence me and found a way to speak anyway. There is something deeply powerful about transforming pain into testimony. For so long, I believed my suffering had no purpose, that it was simply cruelty inflicted without reason. But by speaking it now, by sharing it openly, I take back the power that was stolen from me. I refuse to let his mask be the final word. My words are my own and they will outlive his lies. To anyone who has ever felt trapped in silence, I want you to know this. Your pain is real. Your story matters. Even if those closest to you choose not to see, there are others who will. The truth cannot be buried forever. No matter how heavy the weight of secrecy feels, there is always a crack through which light can enter. I am living proof of that. As I close this chapter, I do not pretend that everything is healed. Healing is not about erasing what happened. It is about carrying the scars with dignity, about refusing to let them define your worth. I carry mine openly now, not with shame, but with strength. Because what was once a prison has become a platform. My silence has become my voice. Thank you for walking with me through this story, for listening to the words I once believed would never be heard. If you are still here, it means you cared enough to listen, and that is more powerful than you know. And before we part, I want to leave you with this. Do not turn away from the quiet ones. Do not ignore the signs that someone may be carrying a truth too heavy for their shoulders. Sometimes all it takes to change a life is a single moment of belief, a single decision to listen.